The only reason I still own my 3 boutique clothing stores, the only reason I'm not bankrupt and broken today, is because when I fell in love with Michael Chen at 62 years old, I made one decision that saved my life. I never told him the truth about my business. My name is Susan. I'm 67 now, and I've been running boutique women's clothing stores in the Portland area for 33 years. Not franchises, not some corporate chain. 3 independently owned stores that I built from absolutely nothing. When my husband David died 15 years ago, he left me with exactly 2 things, a mortgage and a dream. He'd always believed in my eye for fashion, my ability to curate pieces that made women feel beautiful. So I took our life insurance payout, every penny of it, and I opened my first store in a small strip mall in Beaverton. I called it Susan's Closet. Do you know what it's like to be a 47-year-old widow trying to compete with Nordstrom and online shopping? I was there 7 days a week. I drove to Los Angeles 4 times a year to buy inventory. I learned bookkeeping on YouTube at 2 in the morning. I negotiated with landlords, dealt with shoplifters, hired and fired employees, and somehow, I made it work. By the time I turned 55, I had 3 locations: Beaverton, Lake Oswego, and downtown Portland. Each store had its own personality, its own carefully selected inventory. The Beaverton store catered to working moms. Lake Oswego attracted the country club set. Downtown Portland was where I showcased emerging designers and edgier pieces. I paid off every loan, every single one. By 60, I owned all 3 stores free and clear. The buildings were leased, but the businesses, the inventory, the bank accounts, the reputation, all of it was mine. I had 7 employees across the 3 locations. Revenue was steady at about $400,000 a year, with profit margins around 20% after expenses. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable, and I was proud. I was also incredibly lonely. After David died, I threw myself into work. My daughter Lisa lives in Seattle with her family. My son Mark is in Boston. They have their own lives. I had my stores, my book club, my church group at Street Mary's, and a cat named Buttons. That was my entire world for 13 years. Then I met Michael Chen. It was at a church fundraiser in March of 2021. He was new to Street Mary's, had just moved to Portland from San Francisco for a fresh start, he said. He was 58, tall, well-dressed in that effortless way that suggested quality without trying too hard. Silver hair, warm smile, and when he introduced himself, his handshake was firm but not aggressive. We started talking about the fundraiser, then about Portland, then somehow we ended up in a 2-hour conversation about everything from our favorite restaurants to our late spouses. His wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier. He seemed genuinely kind, genuinely interested in me as a person. He asked if he could take me to dinner the following week. I said yes. Those first 6 months with Michael were like something out of a novel I never thought I'd get to read at my age. He took me to the symphony. We hiked in the Columbia River Gorge. He cooked me dinner at his apartment, this beautiful loft in the Pearl District. He met Lisa when she visited for Thanksgiving, and they got along wonderfully. Michael told me he was a business consultant. He'd sold his consulting firm in San Francisco and was semi-retired, just taking on select clients. He was comfortable, he said, not wealthy, but he'd made smart investments over the years. He asked about my work, and I told him I owned boutique clothing stores. I kept it vague. I said business was steady and that I got by. I never mentioned that I owned 3 locations. I never mentioned that they were debt-free. I never mentioned my actual revenue. Why? I don't know. Instinct, maybe. Or perhaps after building something entirely on my own for so long, I'd learned to be careful about who I let into that part of my life. By September, Michael proposed. We were at Cannon Beach, watching the sunset, and he got down on one knee right there in the sand. I cried. I said yes. We set the wedding for January. Just a small ceremony at the church with close friends and family. That's when things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. The week after we got engaged, Michael mentioned that he'd love to see my stores sometime. I'd love to understand your business better, he said over dinner. Maybe I could offer some consulting advice, help you grow. I smiled and changed the subject. Then, about 3 weeks before the wedding, Michael suggested we meet with a financial planner together. Just to make sure we're aligned on our retirement goals, he said. Nothing formal, just a conversation. I told him I already had a financial advisor and was comfortable with my planning. He seemed a little annoyed but didn't push it. The real red flag came 2 weeks before the wedding. Michael's daughter flew in from San Francisco. Her name was Jennifer, and she was 34, a marketing executive at some tech company. Michael was excited for me to meet her. We had dinner at a nice Italian restaurant in the Pearl. Jennifer was polite at first, asking about my background, my family, my interests. Then, halfway through the main course, she pivoted. "So, Susan, Dad mentioned you own a clothing store? That must be challenging in this economy. How's business holding up?" I kept my answer vague. "It's been good. I've been fortunate." "Just the one location?" "I manage a small operation," I said, taking a sip of wine. "And the building, do you own it or lease it?" I felt my spine stiffen. "I lease." "Smart," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't think it was smart at all. "Have you thought about an exit strategy? I mean, retail is dying. Everyone shops online now. What's your plan if things go south?" Michael jumped in. "Jennifer, that's enough. Susan's doing just fine." But Jennifer didn't stop. She turned to her father. "Dad, I'm just saying, you guys should have a real conversation about finances before you get married. Prenups exist for a reason." The table went silent. I excused myself to the restroom. When I came back, Michael apologized profusely. "She's just protective," he said. "She means well." But something in my gut twisted. The next morning, I called my attorney, Margaret Foster. Margaret had handled my business contracts for years. She was sharp, direct, and didn't suffer fools. "I need a prenup," I told her. "Good," Margaret said. "I was hoping you'd say that. I'll draft something ironclad." When I told Michael I wanted a prenup, he seemed surprised but agreed. "Of course," he said. "Whatever makes you comfortable." Margaret drafted a document that kept everything separate. What was mine stayed mine. What was his stayed his. Simple, clean, protective. Michael's attorney reviewed it and came back with revisions. They wanted a clause that stated if either party brought business assets into the marriage, those assets would be shared equally after 5 years. I said no. Michael's attorney pushed back. "It's standard in remarriages," he argued. "It protects both parties." Margaret shut it down. "My client's assets remain hers, period." After some back and forth, they dropped it. We signed the prenup as I'd wanted it. We got married on January 15th at St. Mary's. It was a beautiful ceremony. Lisa and Mark flew in. Michael's daughter Jennifer was there, though she barely smiled in any of the photos. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Maui. It was perfect. We snorkeled, we ate amazing food, we watched the sunrise from our balcony. Michael was attentive, loving, everything I'd hoped for. We got back to Portland at the end of January, and Michael moved into my house in West Lynn. It was a 4-bedroom Craftsman I'd bought 5 years earlier, paid in cash. I didn't tell him that either. The first month of marriage was fine. We settled into routines. Michael worked from home, taking calls with his consulting clients. I went to my stores. We cooked dinner together most nights. Then, in early March, Michael started asking questions again. We were having coffee one Saturday morning when he brought it up. "You know, I've been thinking," he said. "You work so hard at that store. Have you ever considered expanding? Opening a second location?" I took a sip of coffee. "The market's pretty saturated." "But you have such a great eye," he pressed. "I bet with the right investor, you could really scale. I'd be happy to help. I know people." "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but I like things the way they are." He nodded, but I could see frustration flicker across his face. A week later, he mentioned it again. And then again the week after that. Each time, I deflected. Then one evening in mid-March, I came home from the Beaverton store to find Michael in my home office. He was standing at my desk, looking at papers. "What are you doing?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "Oh, hey honey, I was looking for stamps. I didn't mean to snoop, but the papers on my desk were my quarterly tax documents for all 3 stores. Did you find what you needed?" I asked evenly. "Yeah," he said, moving toward the door. "I'll just run to the post office tomorrow." That night, I moved all my financial documents to a locked filing cabinet in my bedroom closet. The next day, I called Margaret. Something feels wrong, I told her. Trust your gut, Margaret said. What do you need? Can you run a background check on Michael? Quietly? Absolutely. 3 days later, Margaret called me to her office. Sit down, she said. I sat. Margaret slid a folder across the desk. Your husband isn't who he says he is. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Michael Chen wasn't semi-retired from a successful consulting firm. He'd filed for bankruptcy twice, once in 2015, once in 2019. He didn't own a consulting firm in San Francisco. He'd been a mid-level employee at a consulting company that let him go in 2018 for performance issues. And here's the part that made my blood run cold. In the past 7 years, Michael had been in 3 serious relationships. 3. The first was with a woman named Patricia Knowles in Sacramento. Patricia owned a catering business. They dated for 2 years, got engaged, and 6 months after the wedding, Patricia agreed to make Michael a partner in her business. Within a year, Michael had drained the business accounts and disappeared. Patricia lost everything. She sued him, but by then he'd filed for bankruptcy and she couldn't recover her losses. The second was a woman named Diane Murphy in San Jose. Diane owned a daycare center. Same pattern. They dated, got engaged, married. Michael convinced her to refinance the property the daycare was on and use him as a co-signer for tax benefits. He took out a second mortgage she didn't know about, drained that money, and vanished. Diane lost her business and her building. The third was a woman in Oakland named Keisha Brown. Keisha owned 2 hair salons. She was smarter than the others. She refused to add Michael to any accounts or properties. When he persisted, she got suspicious and hired a private investigator. She broke off the engagement before the wedding. Keisha was the one who'd filed a police report, but there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute at the time. All 3 women were widows. All 3 were between 55 and 65. All 3 were business owners. All 3 met him through church groups. I felt like I was going to be sick. There's more, Margaret said quietly. Jennifer Chen isn't just his daughter. She's his partner. She helps him identify targets, gather information, gain their trust. What? I whispered. Margaret showed me transcripts from the Oakland police report. Keisha's private investigator had documented Jennifer's involvement. She would befriend the women, ask probing questions about their finances, report back to Michael, and help him strategize his approach. They were a team. What about his wife? I asked. He said she died of cancer. Margaret shook her head. He was married. Her name was Linda. They divorced in 2014. She's alive and well in Denver. I spoke to her this morning. I couldn't breathe. Linda said Michael was emotionally abusive and financially reckless, Margaret continued. She left him when she discovered he'd taken out credit cards in her name and maxed them out. She considers herself lucky she got out when she did. I sat there in Margaret's office, staring at the folder, trying to process what I was hearing. The man I'd married was a con artist, a predator who targeted widows, who used his daughter as an accomplice, who had destroyed at least 2 women's lives and tried to destroy a third. And I was next. What do I do? I asked. Margaret leaned forward. First, you do nothing different. You act normal. You don't let him know you know. Second, I'm contacting the FBI. This crosses state lines, involves fraud, identity theft. This is federal. Third, we document everything. Every conversation, every request he makes, every time he tries to access your finances. How long? I asked. I don't know, Margaret said. But Susan, you have one advantage the other women didn't. What's that? The prenup. And the fact that he doesn't know the full extent of your assets. I nodded slowly. Go home, Margaret said. Act normal. Let him think everything's fine. And trust me, okay? We're going to protect you. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of my life. I went home every night to a man I now knew was planning to destroy me. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I pretended everything was fine. Michael kept pushing about the business. He suggested I hire him as a consultant. He offered to streamline operations. He mentioned how much easier it would be if we had a joint business account. I deflected every time. In mid-April, Jennifer flew in again, supposedly for a work conference. She stayed with us for 4 days. She asked me to lunch one afternoon, just the two of us. Over salads, she brought it up again. Susan, I want to apologize for before the wedding. I came across too strong. It's okay, I said. It's just that I care about my dad, and I want to make sure he's taken care of. You understand? I nodded. He mentioned you've been reluctant to combine finances. I just want you to know, from a business perspective, there are real advantages to partnership. Tax benefits, liability protection, estate planning. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully. But I'm comfortable with how things are. Her smile tightened. Of course, but if you ever change your mind, I'd be happy to help facilitate. I have connections to some excellent business attorneys and accountants. I have my own team, I said. But thank you. That night, Margaret called. The FBI is moving, she said. They've been building a case with the Oakland PD and the California AG's office. They have enough to arrest him on fraud charges related to the previous victims. They're adding charges related to you based on attempted fraud. When? I asked. Soon. Days, maybe a week. Can you hold on? Yes, I said. 3 days later, I came home from my downtown Portland store to find 2 FBI agents in my living room. Michael was in handcuffs. Jennifer was being arrested at her hotel. The lead agent, a woman named Special Agent Torres, walked me through what had happened. We've been tracking Michael Chen and Jennifer Chen for 8 months, she said. Thanks to your attorney's cooperation and the evidence you helped us gather, we have enough to charge them both with conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. Michael looked at me from the couch, his face pale. Susan, this is a mistake. I can explain. No, I said quietly. You can't. They took him away. The trial took almost a year. Michael and Jennifer both eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud. The prosecution brought in Patricia, Diane, and Keisha to testify. Their stories were heartbreaking and infuriating. Michael was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Jennifer got 8. As part of the plea deal, they had to pay restitution to their victims. It won't be nearly enough to cover what those women lost, but it's something. I filed for divorce the day after Michael's arrest. It was finalized within 3 months. I never remarried. I'm 67 now, and I don't think I will, but I'm okay with that. More than okay. My 3 stores are still thriving. I'm training my store manager in Lake Oswego to eventually take over the business when I'm ready to retire. Lisa's daughter, my granddaughter Emma, is studying fashion merchandising at FIT in New York. She talks about maybe joining the business someday. I still have my house. I still have my independence. I still have my freedom. And I have a story to tell other women. Trust your instincts. Protect what you've built. Don't apologize for being careful. The best love story I ever had was the one I had with myself, with my work, with the life I built from nothing. Everything else is just extra. And if that makes me cautious, if that makes me suspicious, if that makes me the kind of woman who keeps secrets even from the man she loves, so be it. Because the only reason I'm standing here today, whole and unbroken, is because I did exactly that.